Good day, everyone. I am Eureka Panes Barago, Peace in English 3C. Today, I will going to discuss my topic, which is the short story after EDSA 1936 to the present. Before I discuss the different stories, let us first understand what Philippine short stories are and why they are important. Philippine short stories are not only fictional stories created for entertainment, they also reflect the real experiences, problems, beliefs, and struggles of Filipino people. From 1936 to the present, Filipino writers have written about different issues such as family, poverty, politics, identity, freedom, human rights, and social change. The EDSA People Power Revolution in 1986 was an important event in Philippine history. After EDSA, Filipino writers became more open in discussing social and political issues. They were able to explore topics that involve democracy, inequality, human rights, gender, migration, and the experiences of ordinary Filipinos. This means that literature can also help us understand history not only through dates and events, but also through the personal experiences of people who live through those situations. For example, when we read a story about poverty, we do not only learn how that poverty exists, we also learn how poverty affects people's choices, relationships, dreams, and the future. That is why post-Itza short stories are important. They allow us to look at Philippine society through the eyes of different characteristics. Okay, so I have here the characteristic of post-Edsa short stories. There are several characteristics of post-Edsa short stories. The first one is the social and political awareness. Second one is the freedom and human rights. The third one is the Filipino identity rather. The fourth one is everyday life. The next is new voices. And then the sixth, contemporary concern. And that's all the characteristics. So let's first discuss the social and political awareness. So the first characteristic is social and political awareness. This means that writers are willing to discuss problems in society and questions the action of people or institution with power. For example, stories may discuss injustice, inequality, political repression, and abuse of power. There are many characteristics of post-EDSA short stories. The first one is social and political awareness. So let's discuss first the social and the political awareness. So this means that writers are willing to discuss problems in society and question the action of people or institutions with power. For example, stories may discuss injustice, inequality, political repression, and abuse of power. These stories encourage readers to ask questions such as: is society fair to everyone? Who has power? Who suffer because of injustice? What happens when people's rights are taken away? Therefore, literature can encourage people to become more aware of the problems around them. Next is the freedom and human rights. Many post EDSA stories discuss the importance of freedom and the rights of individuals. Freedom means that people should be able to live, speak, and make choices without being unfairly controlled or abused. Human rights are also important because every person deserves dignity and respect. Stories like the execution and the among the disappear show how political situation can affect people's freedom and safety. The third one is Filipino identity. Filipino writers explore questions about who we are, where we belong, and how culture affects our lives. Is such a language, migration, family, culture, and belonging can help readers understand Filipino identity. So the fourth one is everyday life. Another characteristic is focus on everyday life. Most EDSA stories do not always focus on famous or powerful people. Instead, they may focus on ordinary family, workers, students, women, and communities. This is important because ordinary people have also stories worth telling. So the fifth one is new voices. Post EDSA literature also gives greater attention to women, marginalized groups, and people with different identities and experiences. This allows literature to present voices that may not always be heard in society. The sixth one, or the last one, is the contemporary concerns. So this includes globalization, technology, migration, and changing social values. This shows that literature changes together with society. So now let's proceed to our very important part of this topic, the six short stories and EDSA time. Okay, so the first one is the very last story of Holly by Lilia Santiago rather. Holly is a mute woman living in a town of De Matanto. Her life is filled with suffering and exploitation. After escaping from Padre Camorra, she wanders around looking for food and shelter. Unfortunately, the people she encounters do not always help her. Instead, she experiences more abuse. She is abused by a group of men and later experiences abuse again when she tries to seek help. Eventually, Holly meets Daniel. She believes that he may protect her, but he gives her a place to stay. However, Daniel also sexually exploit her or abuse her. Because Holly fears for her life, she fights back and kills Daniel. Instead of trying to understand Holly's experiences, the people of the Matanto creates their own stories about what happened. Eventually, Holly loses her sanity and she taken to a mental hospital. So, the important thing about the story is that Holly presents a vulnerable woman who has experienced repeated abuse. The story shows that violence does not only cause physical suffering, it also affects a person's mental and emotional well-being. Another important point is that how society treats Holly. Instead of understanding how she feel, people judge her and turn her experience into gossips. So this makes us ask important question. Should we judge a person without knowing the suffering they have experienced? The story teaches us that vulnerable people need protection, understanding, and justice, not not a judgment. So the main theme the main theme of the story is women oppression, violation, survival, feminism, and social justice. So the next story is The Execution by Charleston Ong. The story is narrated by Mario Lim, who remembers his childhood during the martial law period. So Mario and his family learn about the execution of Gansu, a Chinese man who was sentenced to death. Mario's father, Lem Biansu, knew Gansu was deeply affected by his execution. Mario remembered the fear, confusion, and the tension surrounding the event. After Gansu's execution, Mario noticed that his father changes. His father becomes distant, troubled, and emotionally disconnected from his family. So the story is important because it shows the effect of violence and do not end when an event is over. Ganso's execution affect not only Ganso but also Marius' father and the entire family. This shows how trauma can continue to affect people long after a painful event has happened. The story has also makes us think about justice and injustice. So when people is sentenced to death, we may ask, what was punishment fair? It also shows how political situation can affect ordinary families. Therefore, the story is not only about an execution. It is also about fair, trauma, family relationship, discrimination, and the effects of political power. So the major themes in the story is justice and injustice, freedom, abuse of power, discrimination, human dignity, family, and trauma. Okay, so the third story is Among the Disappeared by Ricardo Ricky Lee. The main character is Junjun, a young boy who grow who grows up without knowing the truth about his parents. His father, Mani, is involved in the resistance against martial law and eventually disappears. His mother, Amy, also becomes involved in the movement and has to hide. Because of this dangerous situation, Junjun grows up under the care of other people. One day, Junjun discovered that he has become invisible. His friend Gain is no longer see or feel him. Instead of simply being afraid, Junjun uses his invisibility to explore the city. During his journey, he meets different people and begins to see the world from different perspectives. Eventually, he meets an old man carrying a picture of a disappeared woman who looks like him. This discovery leads Junjun to search for the truth about his parents. So, one of the most important parts of the story is Junjun's invisibility. His invisibility can be understood as a symbol of people who disappeared during political repression. These people were taken away, but their family were often left without answer. Imagine being a family member who does not know whether your loved one is alive or dead. That uncertainty creates pain and prevents families from moving forward. The story, therefore, emphasizes the importance of memory and truth. It tells us that even if people disappear physically, the stories should not disappear from history. So, the main theme of this story is the political repression, human rights, memory, lost, and the truth. So, the fourth one story is The Gay Love by Bartolome de Jesus, rather. So, the story focuses on Mike and Benji, who become close friends after meeting through work. They spend spend a lot of time together, talking, drinking, watching movies, and sharing their personal problems. Their friendship become more stronger. However, one night Benji tells Mike, "I love you, Mike." Mike becomes shocked and does not immediately know how to respond. Although Mike identifies as straight, he realizes that Benji is an important person in his life. So, the story explores that complicated relationship between friendship, love, identity, and sexuality. It shows that human relationships are not always simple. Sometimes people may experience feelings that they do not immediately understand. The story also encourages readers to avoid judging people simply because their feelings or identities are different from traditional expectation. The important lesson is to accept and understand instead of immediately judging someone. We should try to understand their experiences and feelings. So, the major theme of this story is love, identity, sexuality, acceptance, and social attitude. So the fifth story is Merly by Jose de Lisa Jr. The story follows newspaper reporters who know several prostitutes. One of the women they know is Merly. The narrator becomes emotionally attached to her rather. He does not see her as a prostitute. He sees her as a woman who has dreams, hopes, and problems. Merely plans to go to Japan through an agency to work as an entertainer. She believed that working abroad can give her a better life. However, the narrator becomes worried because another Filipino woman who went to Japan had already reborn in a body inside of the book. So the story shows how poverty can influence people's decision. Merely wants a better life, but the opportunities available to her are limited. Because of the poverty, she considers taking a risky opportunities abroad. These situations reflect the dreams of many people who leave their homes because they believe that working somewhere else can provide a better future. However, the story also shows the danger of exploitation. Merely's situation reminds us that people who are more or vulnerable can become easier target for exploitation. The story therefore explores poverty, survival, hope, exploitation, women's vulnerability, and the desire for a better life. So the last story is The Other Side by Jose de Lisa Jr. So the story focuses on a young boy who observes people and events around him. At first, he sees life mainly from his own point of view. He does not fully understand the struggles of other people. As he as he encounters people from different backgrounds, he begins to realize that not everyone experiences life is in the same way. He started to understand different in social class, poverty, and opportunities. So it suggests that there is another side to every situation. Sometimes we understand only our own experiences because that is what we are familiar with. For example, someone who has never experienced poverty may not completely understand what it feels like to struggle for basic needs. The story encourages us to look beyond our own experiences. It teaches us to develop empathy Empathy means trying to understand what other people is experiencing or feeling. Therefore, the story is not simply about a young boy observing other people, it also about learning to see the world from other person perspective. So the major themes of the story is the social inequality, social class, poverty, perspective, and the human understanding. So for the overall explanation of the story, when we look at all the story together, we can see that there are different problems. They have also have similar purposes. The first one is the very last story of Holy shows the struggles of human women rather who experience violence and oppression. The other one is the execution shows how political violence, injustice and trauma can affect individuals and the family. The third one is among the disappear. It also reminds us about political repression, disappear, disappeared person, memory, and the search for the truth. The next one is the gay love. Explores love, identity, sexuality, and acceptance. Next is Merly. Shows poverty, exploitation, survival, and the desire for a better life. And the last one is the other side. Teaches us how about social inequality and the importance of understanding other people other people's experiences. Although the stories are different from one another, they also all encourage us to look at society more carefully. They show us that behind every social issues there are real people with the real feelings, real struggles, dreams and hopes. So to conclude, post EDSA people stories are important because they reflect the changing realities of people's society. These stories discuss important issues such as freedom, human rights, identity, poverty, inequality, violence, love, migration, and social justice. They also give voice to people who may be ignored or misunderstood by the society. Through these stories, we learn that literature can help us understand history and society from a human perspective. It also reminds us that story is not only about famous people and major events. History is also about ordinary people and how they experience the events happening around them during those those years or those times. As readers, this story tells us to remember the past, understand other people's experiences, respect human dignity, and become more aware of the problems in our society. Most importantly, they teach us to look beyond our own experiences and see the other side of life. That ends of my report. Thank you for listening and I hope you learned something from my presentation.